Hi, everybody, and welcome to Jackson Spalding's Real Talk webinar, How to Protect Company Culture Through Internal Communications. My name is Tracy Messier, and I co-lead our work-life team at Jackson Spalding, along with our coaching and sports practices, and I'll be your moderator today. The coronavirus pandemic has forced dramatic and rapid changes in the way we work and live. Recent findings from Global Web Index indicate people regard their employers as one of the most trusted sources of information right now, and the need for employees to feel supported and engaged during these uncertain times is critical. We're all balancing the pressures of working remotely, providing childcare, homeschooling, cooking 3 meals a day, and the volatility of the pandemic. The list goes on. Our goal with JS Real Talk is some frank and open conversation, with the webinar being guided by your questions. Our goal is to give practical takeaways to deploy to your business and to your teams immediately. Before our panelists introduce themselves, I do want to say that in sharing our perspectives, we want to be respectful of our clients during this time. So we'll be speaking to industries and situations without specific brand names. Okay, let's get started. Let's meet our panel. Chowning, would you like to start us off?
Hi, everyone. Chowning Aguilera. I lead our healthcare practice at Jackson Spalding and really delighted to be with you. I think it's the afternoon, but as we all know, time has blurred together. So thanks for joining us.
And Pam.
Hi, everyone. I'm Pam Sawyer. Pleasure to be here. I am the HR leader at Jackson Spalding.
And Whitney.
Hey, everybody. Whitney Ott, one of the co-owners at Jackson Spalding. I lead our internal communications and really excited to be with you today.
All right, so before we start the Q&A, let's talk a little bit about what a healthy culture looks like, just so we can level set. Whitney, could you start us off with that, please?
Sure thing. It's interesting, Tracy. I'm sure every single person tuning in today has their own definition of culture. And I certainly have my favorite that I've heard over the years. And mine's from the late Professor Sumantra Ghoshal. And he was a professor at the London Business School, and he described culture as the smell of a place. Smell of a place. I just love it. Maybe because you can almost feel it and almost smell it. And at Jackson Spalding, we believe there are two types of cultures: healthy cultures and unhealthy cultures. And I'm sure Ghoshal would say the ones that smell great and the ones that smell not so great. When we think about healthy cultures, we compare them to greenhouses. And at JS, we talk a lot about what that means. And that's a place where people and ideas can flourish, where the potential of your people is actualized, where there's honest, open communication that almost kind of creates that flourishing environment where your people want to be around each other, they feed off of each other, they just organically communicate and build up each other, want to learn from each other and grow each other. And all of that in that environment really creates a fascination with the business. Conversely, unhealthy cultures are static, almost frozen, cold environment, where the ideas are not flowing freely. The people, instead of actualizing potential, are more stunted in their growth. And open, flowing dialogue is replaced with silos and kind of a mentality of I've just got to do what I've got to do, and not really sharing or collaborating. And that fascination with business from healthy cultures, unfortunately, is often replaced with frustration. So just a few things to keep in mind as we kick off today. And hopefully we'll spend more time talking about and inspiring some really good smelling cultures.
All right, thanks, Whitney. We encourage you to send questions during the webinar. You can email us right now at realtalk@jacksonspalding.com. And if we don't get to your questions today, someone from our panel will reach out to you with an answer. All right, we're ready to dive in with your questions. The first question we received asks, is this an opportunity to evolve into a more collaborative, healthy culture? Chowning, I'll let you start with that one.
So there's probably a couple ways of looking at this. Perhaps it smells a little stale, as Whitney said, or a little bit stinky, or there's just a new opportunity for collaboration. At JS, part of our workforce is remote, in satellite offices, and then the rest of us are centralized. So what a great opportunity for us to try and figure out how to be more together, right? But COVID-19, we've heard two phrases over and over again: unprecedented and uncharted. The one thing, though, that's true about COVID as is any time for a company where it's going through a very momentous or change-oriented or crisis occasion, is that it is an opportunity to improve things, to improve your culture, to improve collaboration. But there's a way that you have to do it, and it's equal parts listening and equal parts communicating. You hear all the time that companies will sometimes try to take a top-down culture approach, talk at their employees, but reality is engaging, deploying influencers, unofficial leaders, and official leaders, and really hearing people across the organization, no matter how big or how small, is what's going to really make the difference at the end of the day. So really listen as much as you talk, listen more than you talk at this point in time. And that's going to be a first step you can take in order to ultimately improve that collaboration. Pam, you're immersed in this stuff all the time. I don't know if you have something you'd want to add here.
I think this is a great opportunity to measure yourself as an organization. Most of our clients already conduct employee engagement surveys or run net promoter scores on other things. And this is a perfect opportunity to see if engagement is changing post crisis.
Great, thank you both. Okay, our next question. Outside of executive videos or video conferencing, what creative tactics should we be using? Whitney, I'll let you take a crack at that one.
Great. Yeah, a couple of thoughts to share here. We've seen some real creativity in a couple of areas. The first is pay attention to what's trending on social, especially as it relates to user-generated content, and ask yourself, how might I apply this internally at my company, at my organization? And just in the last couple of weeks, we had a client do this extremely well with the first photo challenge that many of you may have seen or participated in on Instagram, asking folks to kind of post their first photo together. I think it started as couples, and then friends, and then dogs, pets, et cetera, and kind of grew from there. And they thought, what a great opportunity. Let's challenge our people. And this is an organization with thousands and thousands of folks just in the US to say, hey, why don't you share your first photo as a company employee, a company team member. And so you had folks who had been there just a matter of months, as well as folks who'd been there 30 plus years, sharing their first photo kind of decked out in their team gear. And it was a great kind of morale boost and a way to connect. And then the other thought I would share is just think about how to tailor your content or the opportunities for your folks to share and engage in ways that are just super relevant to them right now. Meet them where they are. A couple of quick examples from our agency. We have every year, our wellness team kind of puts on a wellness challenge. We've got a little competition within our agency. And one of our developers, JC, created this awesome turnkey digital leaderboard. And so it's so fantastic. We moved it up a little bit early this year to get us all our competition and health going strong. But because it's digital and it's super easy, you can just log your steps. And that's just a great way to engage with us and share where we're all part of the same thing. And then another example, kind of a segmented audience approach. We have a JS Moms group. And one of my partners, Joanna Singleton, brilliantly, just as a working mom, shared some insight with me. I was talking about trying to get info from my kids when I get home from work, who are 2, 4, and now 7. And I was like, I ask them to share their highs and their lows, and sometimes they just clam up and they don't want to talk. And Joanna was like, oh, you should use more comfy language for your kids. And I was like, what do you mean? And she's like, try popsicles for the highs and poopsicles for the low. And yes, I just said poopsicle on a professional webinar. And it works. Apparently kids, especially boys under the age of 10, really like talking about their poopsicles. So as it relates to internal communications, parents are reeling right now, like Tracy mentioned, trying to balance work, or I should say juggle, because I don't really think you can balance it, juggle work and being a stay-at-home parent and teaching on top of everything else. And so we brought the poopsicle popsicles to the moms group and to the working parents, and it has just organically taken off. And I'll tell you, these stories that they're sharing, it is just gold, and will make you laugh till you cry. And they're definitely been the popsicles of my day every time one comes through.
Thanks, Whitney. Well, along those lines, we received several questions asking about technical or tactical strategies. The question is, what are tactical strategies for keeping team members motivated and engaged when goals seem virtually impossible to achieve in this climate? Chowning?
Yeah, so Obviously, there's essential businesses who are going to have a whole different mountain that they're climbing right now. And then there's non-essential businesses that might have a similar mountain they're climbing, but just in a very different way. And then other businesses who are going to be very quiet and a lot slower because of what we're seeing. That being said, engagement's going to be key. And there's really 4 areas that we would look at and different examples that we've seen from our clients. So if we look at those 4 areas, I'm going to break it down for you quickly, but acts of kindness would be the first one, recognition, sense of team, and togetherness. Acts of kindness, some examples we have here, virtual care packages. So whether that's from your coworkers and people who you're working with day in and day out as you try and meet these really huge goals, or ones that you can engage family members in the community and sharing with your staff. That's just one little thing that really has this positive feel-good impact. Another one, catered meals. We've all seen in the news the catered meals that are going to hospitals and to the workers on the front lines, so that they can really focus on what matters most, and that's caring for our communities right now. Free childcare. We're all with our kids at home right now. How are these people who are essential workers supposed to do it when they can't actually be in their homes? And then mental health and well-being programs for any business right now are certainly a really big part of this, that we've really got to focus on, because there's an impact right now and there will be a long-term impact too. As for recognition, nominating coworkers, a lot of companies will have awards programs or different ways to show love to your coworkers who exemplify your cultural values or things that are important to your organization. So really thinking through how you can employ those and deploy those out, or even create new ones. And ultimately then, how do you actually get that information out there in a way that feels meaningful to your staff? So your internal newsletters, your intranet, and perhaps even on your social media channels and public facing areas well, where you maybe don't even nominate one person, but you actually show a group of people who are doing great works for your organization. And then also for the essential businesses, extending retention and referral bonuses and thinking about how you're going to keep motivation high aside from just pats on the back is going to be a really other big part of this, and any sort of enhanced benefits that can be added on. Team togetherness, we're talking a lot about that. Whitney already mentioned some examples and we'll talk through more, but anything we can do to make that feeling of togetherness happen, even in essential businesses. You're running so fast that it's hard to feel that way. So we'll talk through more examples like that as we go.
All right, thank you, Chowning. Whitney, the next one seems best suited for you. The question is, what are the top things a CEO should do consistently to manage a culture during a stressful time?
The top things, there's so many, right? But I'm going to go with 2 that I'll share. I think the first would be to connect with and encourage your people so much. You cannot do this enough. So much so that I was joking earlier and saying you could even change your title, whatever it may be, to Chief Encouragement Officer. And I have a feeling you would not be sorry that you did. And then second, I would say repeat what's important, which means I have to repeat it. Repeat what's important. I'm sure if you all are interested in culture, you're tuning in today, that you are familiar with, if you haven't read Daniel Coyle's Culture Code. And deep into the book, he talks about a study that Inc. magazine did a few years back, where they interviewed executives from 600 different companies and said, predict how many of your own employees do you think would be able to recite or share your top 3 priorities at your company? And the executives had a pretty high number. They said 64%. I think 64% could do it. And in reality, only 2% could. And Coyle's point was, you have to drastically over communicate priorities. He goes on in the book to talk about, you can't just do it once. You got to write it on the walls. You've got to put it on memos. You've got to share it in town halls. And so doing that, he says, helps your priorities become part of the oxygen of your organization. And it kind of goes back to that Goschel statement of the smell of the place. And here Coyle's talking about the oxygen of the place. And I think there's a real power to that. And so I would recommend asking yourself, your leadership, your internal communications team, a key question right now, regardless of how large you are as an organization, how long you've been around, or how new or maybe small you are. And the question, I believe, is designed to really help you think through what are your cultural priorities? What's worth repeating from a cultural standpoint? And the question is, what's your internal communications compass? what's guiding you? What's your North Star when it comes to internal communications? And my hope would be that really comes from your brand foundation. We help clients a lot kind of with brand strategy, brand foundation, and really either establishing or refreshing, your mission, your vision, your core values and guiding principles. And at the end of the day, internal communications really should be an extension of or a reflection of who you are, that brand foundation. And boy, I feel like in times like this of uncertainty and a lot of change, it's really easier than most to evaluate when that foundation of yours is a little bit rocky or shaky and when you're on solid ground. And I won't belabor this, but from the Jackson Spalding perspective, we talk a lot about our vision. We talk a lot about our 8 values, starting with we tell the truth. And we've been crystal clear with each other as an executive team and with everyone in our agency that's going to be our North Star. And that coupled with a really simple mantra our executive team came up with early days, about 6 weeks ago. And we just said, during this time of kind of COVID response, when we're talking to our people verbally or written form, et cetera, we wanted to always do 3 things. We want to instill confidence, we want to show compassion, and we want to provide clarity. So just again, confidence, compassion, and clarity. We've written the top of internal drafts. We've said it to each other, and it's just been really helpful. So I would just say, check your internal communications compass and make sure that you like the direction it's pointing you and your employees in.
Thank you, Whitney. Our next question asks, how do you engage staff when technology isn't consistent across your organization? And Pam, I know you've been dealing with this a lot in conjunction with our IT department because we're all in different places now. So how are you handling this?
Thank you. So engaging employees, even in normal times, often is inconsistent because of technology, because of travel, different locations, diversity preferences, time zones, different resources. So being inconsistent, I think, is normal. However, during a crisis or a challenging period of time, there are a couple of things I think you can do because of the inconsistent technology. And one is leverage all modes of technology. Don't rely on one, and just make sure that the message that you're using across all of those modes is frequent and very consistent in tone and tenor. You may even have to think through some incentives to make sure people are reading the messages, and that can be customized per, I think, organization. The second thing is utilize your influencers. You might have heard Chowning start to talk about that earlier, but there are influencers in your organization who aren't necessarily your people with leadership titles. And I'm sure right now, all of you are probably imagining 1 or 2 people in your head or hearing their voice in your ear. And reach out to them. They will give you great advice on how to communicate better with people, how to engage them, and make sure that they're getting what they need during this crisis period. I think there are lots of great ways to do it, and you just have to be consistent and frequent.
Great. Well, Pam, the next question is also for you.
Okay.
It is for companies whose cultures are partly based on relationships that are built in the office. How can you effectively transition to a distributed workforce model?
Oh, thank you again. Great question. So I'm a big believer in plan the work and work the plan, and that really applies to leadership development and in normal times and in challenging times. So in particular, I think you have to get your leaders prepared to lead through any situation, and then you get out of the way and let them do their job. And in terms of replacing human interaction in relationships, you can't replace it. So don't even try to do that. However, do what you can to emphasize team building, personal connection. So for example, at JS last week or maybe 2 weeks ago, when we were really getting into the thick of things, one of our leaders said, I really want to start talking to people now. I think the leadership team should too. Can we divvy up the list of every single person at JS and start phoning them till everybody has received a personal phone call? And can we continue doing that every week? And she didn't need to do that, but it was a wonderful idea. It was very meaningful for people, especially to get a phone call from someone they hadn't talked to in a while. And it's now spurred a whole bunch of new conversations in the organization and hopefully relationships.
Great, thank you. The next question asks, knowing we can't see or interact as well with body language, how can we be more effective with our communication on calls and video chats? What kinds of tips can you share on tone, volume, and how we speak? I'm actually going to take this question because we've been working a lot with our coaching clients on getting them ready for actual media interviews. But some of these same principles work when you're talking within your teams. So the first one is don't step on each other's audio. You oftentimes have to pause and let it breathe a little bit because of an internet delay, but it's really important to be listening during this time and not be talking over someone. People want to feel like they're being heard. So that's really important. You want to acknowledge the awkwardness. We're all in this awkward position. Sometimes our technology doesn't work, and it's okay as long as we give grace. And speaking of giving grace, when someone's dog barks or their child walks into the room and needs something right now, that's the time to give grace. You want to make sure that we're all communicating that to one another to make sure no one feels like they're not doing their job because of what's happening in their household. You want to listen for silence. If you have a team call and there is a person or people not contributing, that's a sign that maybe they are depressed or have something going on that you might want to follow up with a phone call after the conversation just to check on them. You want to act like the people who you are talking to are in the room. You want to smile and look at them and really try to connect with them as best you can. That makes the call seem so much more sincere. And then finally, you want to watch subconscious gestures. For example, nodding or tilting your head oftentimes means people are engaged. But if someone's fidgeting or looks unengaged, thanks ladies, looks unengaged, then that's the time again to follow up after the call just to check on them and make sure they're doing okay. All right, so back to our brilliant panelists. One business leader asked in this question, how do you balance business needs with employees' emotional needs? Pam, I'll let you get started with that one.
So in our role in HR and as HR professionals, we're often balancing business and emotional needs with team members. So imagine, very factual versus inspirational, compliance to creative, formal and informal messaging. And it's one of the things I personally love about being in my field is I get to exercise a lot of different muscles when I am working with different people. However, in this time period, you have to be really thoughtful about what people need. And right now, people need reassurance about how their safety is being taken care of, and safety means physical safety, financial safety, and mental health. So you have to provide information that takes care of those facts. And then you also have to provide the inspirational, hopeful messages. We're going to recover. We're going to come back from this, and we're going to be able to give each other high fives. So you have to give something that's going to take care of both the skeptic and the sensitive. Whitney, would you like to add anything to this?
Pam just knows I want to jump in. Yeah, I have an example that I think is great, but really to talk about it, it starts with this idea that it's a lot easier to have something for everyone at all kind of corners, if you will, of the organization and on that spectrum, if you know your people. And obviously, the larger your organization gets, the more difficult that becomes to have a personal relationship with every single employee. It's just not feasible. But leaning on leaders, like we've all talked about, you can know your team. And I know a lot of organizations tuning in today, like Jackson Spalding, have personal assessments, or you have your employees take, whether that's strength finders or there's a whole plethora of them. And one that we have found extremely helpful, just as a tip for ongoing internal communications, way before this pandemic, has been the DISC profile. And I do want to give you a little anecdote, but for it to make sense, I need to just show you this briefly. Essentially, this gives you common language for work styles, kind of how you approach work and how others might approach work. And because there's only 4 kind of main quadrants, it's a pretty easy to understand. And it's literally speaking of part of oxygen or the smell of a place, this is part of Jackson Spalding's DNA now. We all talk about it. It gives kind of freedom to discuss kind of your approach and others' approach, but in a safe way. And so just to quickly run through this, there's way more, and most people are more than one letter. But from an extreme perspective, the D stands for dominance, and that person is all about results. Show me where we're going. Let's get there and get out of my way. The I, high energy, influence, probably a talker. The S is for steadiness and just kind of even and just a really good kind of team player. And then conscientiousness is the C. I joke a lot that you could replace that with a P for process lover or perfectionist. But a lot of great strengths here are represented here, but it's really about the approach. And as it relates to internal communications, just literally 2 or 3 weeks ago, there was an internal group working on a pretty important document that we wanted to share, a presentation with the entire agency. And we were like, you know what, let's test this and bounce it off of 2 really respected senior leaders here, but who we intentionally went to 2 folks who were very almost opposite on the DISC profile. So a high D and a high S. And not too surprisingly, the D came back and said, it feels pretty soft. I got to be honest, it feels like a lot of fluff, you know, like I'm ready to go into battle and get to the other side of this thing. And we're sitting here talking with all these words and fluff. And the S, on the other hand, said, you know, this is the virtual hug that I need. And I think so many other people need right now. So in great news in that situation, we were able to punch up some of the action-oriented items as needed to satisfy the D, but also explain to the high D that, wow, you know, there are a lot of high S's here, and those 2 people respect each other immensely. And so it really helped. And that's an example of where you could do something now or post-COVID to really know your people a little better, and it absolutely will serve you really well communicating internally in the next crisis or in just normal state.
Thanks, Pam. Thanks, Whitney. Chounding, I'm going to give the next question that came in to you. It asks, during a crisis, you've previously said that daily communication is vital. That said, at what point in a prolonged crisis like COVID-19 do you hit saturation on virus-related messages, and how often should your team communicate?
Yes. So during the height of uncertainty and when this all began, where hours could result in changes, right? Daily was necessary, if not more than daily. But now as things have shifted and news has slowed, last week, for example, at Jackson Spalding, we moved to Monday, Wednesday, Friday. However, now, as we start hearing about recovery efforts, we'll have to reevaluate how and when we're communicating. In other words, there is not a silver bullet, and every time and every scenario has to be evaluated. So one way to do that would be focusing on these 6 key areas. What's our message that we actually need to communicate? Really focusing on that. Who are our messengers? What are the tools that we have at our disposal? What's our timing? Cadence, like we were just talking about, both in terms of when it goes out and how often it goes out. Our tone, and then place. Now, place, you know, is interesting right now. But over time, that will become more important, whether it's a meeting room, whether it's on site, whether it's a virtual meeting. But, you know, right now, that's a little bit of an interesting one. But those 6 areas
right
are
now,
really...
it's like kitchen, family room, kitchen,
yes.
family room.
You should see my setup behind the computer here. Exactly. But yeah, you know, so that's one way to look at it. I will say for essential businesses and working really closely with healthcare businesses across the gamut, it's a little bit more challenging, right? At any given time. Not only do you have the normal internal communications that need to happen because this is, I said it earlier, I'm going to use it, uncharted and unprecedented. Please give me bingo apology here on those words. But it is a little bit more complicated as regulations around safety protocols and different ways that you interact with the public, or wearing masks, and who wears masks and who doesn't. Not that we as consumers or we as individuals don't need to know that, but for those businesses that really do have employees on the front lines interacting with the public right now, whether that's for care or restocking a grocery store, they're going to have to navigate some more challenging waters than those of us who are mostly sheltering in place.
Thanks, Chounding. Okay, we're going to try to get through as many questions as possible that you've submitted, but we'll have several we don't get to. So we want to make sure that you know we will email you directly with answers. We received several questions about the different forms of communication. So Chan, I'm going to give this one to you as well. This question says, how do we decide the best way to approach communications between oral and written?
Well, I kind of answered that a little bit, but I'll unpack it a little further and try to do so quickly, just to Tracy's point, to get to some others. But, one example I'm thinking about, or a few actually, are where there's more sensitive information that needs to be shared. So let's unpack this and try and take it a bit more specific, because that might be helpful. When you think about delivering that information, sometimes small group, like one-to-many scenarios, or one-to-a-few, or one-to-one are going to be better in a conversation, not writing. But the thing as an organization that you have to evaluate is, will different pockets of people hear different things as a result? Have you actually controlled the message in a way that's going to have the right sort of impact and the right sort of absorption among those different individuals? And maybe you have, but maybe a written communication is needed as well on top of that for further clarity after those individual conversations have happened. Or the alternative is that it needs to be written because there's too much that could be misinterpreted in a cascading communication. So, again, like the little wheel we showed earlier with the 6 different key considerations, that's the type of thing that we would recommend looking at for each scenario to determine if you're going to do written, oral, or a combination of both.
Great, thank you. Pam, the next question seems to be in your wheelhouse. This one is about communicating with all employees, even if they're not working right now. The question says, what are the best practices for keeping furloughed employees engaged?
So I would encourage thinking about engaging furloughed people in actually 3 phases. You think about the pre-furlough period, which for many companies, they didn't have much time to focus on this. But if you are considering furlough as the next step in your organizational management, I would encourage you to spend a little time thinking through in the pre-furlough phase, what are the expectations? Who are going to be the contact people for the furloughed employees, especially on pay, on benefits, and spend as much time as possible with them. It's really scary to hear that you're being furloughed, and they need as much compassion and respect during this period of time as anybody. And they especially need that because it will help the engagement during the middle phase and when they re-enter. So in the during the furlough, and if it's 4 weeks or 2 months or even 6 months, hopefully not that long, I would go to a once a week communication to keep them engaged with what's happening in the business or in the team, and then make sure they understand who their contacts are for, again, pay and benefit needs they might have, or unemployment in a lot of people's situation. And then in the week or so, when people are ramping back up to re-enter the organization, I would encourage ramping up the frequency of the communication, whatever that may be, about team dynamics, what new expectations are for their role, if there are new expectations, and then anything they need to know about the business going forward. What you want when people re-enter and walk through the doors the first day, or if it's they're logging back on for the first day, are no surprises. They need to feel like they didn't miss a beat. And communication is really effective to getting that done.
Thanks, Pam. Okay, our next question. What would you recommend on how best to manage the potential conflict between frontline workers whose jobs require them to be on the front lines serving their customers' needs versus support workers who can work remotely in home and not be exposed to the virus by not exposing themselves to the public? Chowning, I'll let you start with that one since you're in our healthcare practice, lots of frontline workers there.
Yeah, this is a tough one, and there isn't a silver bullet or a perfect answer here. And really, at the end of the day, as a business, you're doing what you need to do to protect your employees in all the ways that you can. Those who need to be on the front lines are there. Those who can be at home are at home. It's a business continuity play. And as such, that's not an answer anyone's going to like. However, that's where you have to think about, how do you communicate that in a way that's open and transparent, and so that everyone understands that you're doing the right thing for each individual and for the company as a whole. But really, just, internal communications here, it probably needs to come from your CEO or from team leads, depending on your organization structure. There's only so much it can do. And then there's some of these ideas that we've talked about in terms of how you support each other earlier. Maybe the teams who are at home can support those who are on site in different ways, those virtual care packages. But it's just the reality of where we are right now. And it's what businesses are doing to keep everyone in the best place possible. Whitney, I know you might have some thoughts as well from your work with other companies too.
Well, this is where that little mantra we talked about, at least for our employees, makes a lot of sense, right? When you think about just the compassion and clarity specifically around that. I mean, I think if you are just genuine with people and you are just very straight talk around, like you said, Channing, business continuity requires this. You're clear about that, but you're also very clear and compassionate in how you want to help support them and that their health and safety comes first. And then likewise, making sure that your compassion for those individuals on the front lines, you communicate that and what you've done to support them to the folks who are not on the front lines. Because I think in a great way, you see this rallying of folks wanting to take care of their own folks, right? And so you just want to make sure that you are compassionate and clear, and then you share all of that with all of the different folks in your agency or in your organization.
Great. Thanks, ladies. Whitney, I have one more for you. This question says, our company has a few remote offices that total 1/6 of our workforce. The recent company-wide remote work setup has actually unified our company, in my opinion, as we are all on the same remote level. How do you suggest we keep up the momentum when things normalize?
Such a great question, and I think a lot of folks have written about this, and some people I think that we're meeting with are almost embarrassed to admit that they have learned some things that are really positive. I don't know if you'd say silver linings, but certainly some either innovations or positive outcomes from this entire situation. And so I would just say, first and foremost, if you haven't taken stock of what those are, go ahead and keep an ongoing list. I know we have, as owners at the agency and certain other leaders in the agency, we've talked about some of those and shared them so that we can be very intentional as things start to normalize or just get a little bit back to normal. How can we be really intentional to create that environment? Because it's going to take some work to not just fall back into our old ways and the way business was done, right? And so I think for this organization specifically, getting creative and letting folks help determine how that's going to look. So for that organization, maybe it's a full work from home, maybe it's a partial work from home, maybe even if 5 of the 6 people are in the same office and they're used to getting in a conference room together and then conferencing in their partner or their colleague from their other, maybe they all are in their offices, but they all go individually, so they're equal share on screen and try to recreate that. So just kind of spitballing here, but I think the important thing is pay attention to what you actually like, or say, why didn't we think of this sooner, and really fuel that fire as you emerge from this.
Thank you. Okay, I have one last question before we wrap up. And Pam, I'm going to give this to you because I know you're working on this for Jackson Spalding. This question is, what's around the corner? How should we start planning for return to the office, or our new normal, as people are calling it?
Also a great question. It's been a heavy lift for this week for us at Jackson Spalding. So at this point, we've planned for the crisis, we've planned for flexible work schedules, healthcare and safety, and a handful of other things we didn't even know we were going to plan for. We're now moving into a new phase where we're thinking about new space configurations, new sanitation methods in the office that no one had ever thought they would be doing, mental health issues, because this pandemic has caused true grief and hardship for some people, and anxiety that we probably won't see again in a while. And childcare challenges. No school and uncertainty about summer camps is definitely anxiety filling for people. So we don't have the answers to all of those yet. What we do know, and we've created agreement around, is our philosophy for a return to the office, and that's safety is going to be first, and allowing people to care for their loved ones and their family is also going to be first. We're planning on putting together all our answers over the next 4 weeks. Let's hope that we can get to those so that we can make sure everyone does return happy, healthy, and ready to be able to give each other virtual high fives in the office, because we won't be doing handshakes and high fives, I don't think, in 4 weeks. But at least we'll be doing some high fives in the office place. If anybody wants to talk about this or share ideas after the conference or after this webinar, I'm happy to talk to anyone. It's really timely and topical.
Great. Okay, ladies, well, we're going to wrap now. And how I'd like to do that is just with some final do's and don'ts. So anything that you didn't share that maybe we want to make sure we get in, or anything you'd like to reiterate, Chowning, I'll start with you.
Well, I can't believe we got through this whole thing without me mentioning it. And so I'm going to put on a little healthcare cap here. It's a healthcare crisis at the end of the day, and that's where we started. Are we having economic challenges? Are there other things that are coming out of this? Absolutely. But what we need to remember is that it will and will continue to be a healthcare crisis. And what we don't want to do, and we don't want organizations to do, is to actually try to become healthcare experts or not rely on experts. So whether that's relying on the CDC, World Health Organization, if you're an international business, Department of Public Health, really putting trust in those organizations, and for healthcare experts you have access to, whether it's within your organization or outside. But we don't want to prophesize, we don't want to opinionate, we don't want to get into the fray of the talk that's happening and cause confusion. We really want to rely on those resources. So do remember it's a healthcare crisis. Don't try to become a healthcare expert.
She's talking to us just as much as she's talking to everyone tuning in right now. Just be clear about that.
All love.
All right, Pam, any final do's or don'ts?
Sure. In this period of uncertainty and disruption, employees are really relying on their leadership to give them certainty. And there's already evidence through data and surveys showing that trust is being built between employers and employee during this period of time. So even though it's challenging, my do is look at this as an opportunity to pivot your culture or even level up your culture. There's some great stuff that is happening in organizations, innovations that we didn't even know we were going to be ideating on. And so I just say, look for those opportunities where you can.
Great, thank you. And Whitney, final do's or don'ts?
Start with a couple don'ts and then one do. Don't assume, reiterating, don't assume your people know what your priorities are or what you care the most about. Don't assume that they know just how much you mean to them, the employees mean to you. Don't assume that. Go out of your way to let them know and to be there for them. And then my do would be do whatever it takes. Don't put it off. Do whatever it takes to get to know and to grow and to move toward real love for your people. And I know that might sound a little bit weird in a professional setting, but my inspiration for it is a very good one. It's Cheryl Batchelder, if you haven't read Dare to Serve. And she recently spoke, actually really well timed, at the very first week, I think, that everyone was kind of forced to work from home of this pandemic in Atlanta at a business breakfast. And I was reminded how much that she credits the turnaround of a lot of different companies that she's positively influenced because of the love of the people that they've instilled, a genuine appreciation for, support of, and love of people. And I think the reason it relates to internal communications is I think the more fond of your people, just truly, and the more that you love them, the easier it's going to be to effectively communicate with them and to provide them what they need. And I'm not saying communicating won't still be a labor at times, some work, but I think it should be a labor of love. And I do think it's a love language worth mastering.
Thank you. Well, thank you to all three of you, Pam, Whitney, and Chowning, for being our panelists today. And thank you all for attending today's Real Talk webinar. If you didn't get your question answered or have a new question you'd like to ask, you can email us at realtalk@jacksonspalding.com and someone will respond to your question. You can also sign up for our daily COVID-19 briefs, and we will also be sharing regular blog content and updates in our email newsletter, The Think Brief. Plus, we'll share a recap and video of this conversation on Monday, and we welcome your feedback in our survey. We want to make Real Talk what you want to talk about. On behalf of the entire team at Jackson Spalding, thank you for taking the time to join us. Stay well, and we hope to see you at our next Real Talk event.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.